Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Thanks, Henry. Thank you. Nice to be here. Nice to know I'm not alone with my cough. I saw some cough drops being passed around. I'm more feeble than usual, and it's my fourth week of some kind of awful thing, you know. And I would feel sorry for myself, but somehow it's just doesn't look good on a Buddhist. You know? Be a Buddhist teacher. And it's just nice to be here. Yeah, I know I recognize a lot of faces, and at least some faces. My memory is going as well, but I'm sure I've been coming here probably for a decade or more, so I feel a good connection with this group, and it's nice to see that it's thriving post-pandemic. So many groups really kind of lost their energy. I'm going to do my best today. This is my first time in public in a few weeks, and trying to teach. What came up for me and what I've been reflecting on as a topic for today is perception, which is a really key idea in terms of meditation, and has much broader implications than just meditating. And it's something that's there in certain essential Buddhist teachings as well. And what makes it particularly important to me is that it has such a, and I'll try to define and talk about how Buddhists view this term perception. It's not exactly the way we do in ordinary Western language, but its role is so important in kind of creating our whole view of the world and how we see the world. And, so it's connected to the first factor of the Eightfold Path, right view. And this is so key to a Buddhist understanding of the world, that the world isn't one thing. It isn't an absolute thing, particularly in terms of how we understand it, but that it is a construction, and that our understanding of it is constructed. And so that construction is essentially what perception is. So traditionally, the narrow sort of definition of perception in terms of Buddhism is the labeling quality of the mind, or the naming quality of the mind. So everything that we see, hear, taste, touch, smell, or think, we put a name on. And so it's very tied in with language. But how we name things, that's a relatively neutral factor when it comes to things like tables and chairs and the sky. But when it comes to our understanding of reality, or see important things like politics or relationships, and how we're interacting with people, all of a sudden how we name those things and how we understand them, and then how we perceive them, takes on huge significance. it can, so, mostly I'm going to talk about the personal here, not get too much into the global, which we're all trying to ignore as much as possible. But I'll give a couple of personal examples. I have long identified as a depressive. I started to get depressed when I was 14, was treated in various traditional methods through my teenage years. They all failed, of course, or I failed, whatever. But it's something that I carried as a label and as an identity without really reflecting on what it was that I was calling depression. There was a feeling, and I just gave it that name. Now, and that's perception, okay? It's labeling. It's there's an experience. It's just an experience. But then I name it, and then something very important happens that's part of perception, which is belief. When we name something, we believe that it is that. We give it a reality, which then starts to operate on its own. And so that if you have a feeling and you say, oh, this is depression, there's then a reaction in the mind, which is, oh, this is bad. I hate this. There's something wrong with me. I'll never get out of this. All the story, right? And each of those thoughts then has another feeling that it triggers, which is a more unpleasant feeling, so that you fall into this feedback loop that then becomes all encompassing, and it can be crippling, as you know, if you've struggled with depression. So there was one day, probably a decade or so ago, one evening, I was driving out to Spirit Rock Meditation Center in Marin to give a talk. And I have a monthly class there. It was a Friday evening. And I was getting just past Fairfax, and I started to have this feeling. And I thought, oh, I'm feeling depressed. And then I thought, what? I'm going to Spirit Rock to give a talk. I'm not unhappy about that. That doesn't make me sad. I don't have any negative feelings about it. And so as I reflected on that, I'm not sure that I put this all together at that time, but that moment particularly brought it to my attention that there was something distorted about my understanding of what was happening. And eventually I asked myself a simple question, which was, what would a normal person feel on the way to give a talk in public? And what I realized is anxiety, right? Because that's the normal reaction, a little anxiety, or a lot, maybe for some people. And I thought, so over that time, as I've reflected back on that, I thought, what have I been feeling? And what's really been going on? And I realized that in my way of understanding this, and this could be wrong, but it's useful at least, is that I have associated unpleasant feelings so much with this language, with this idea of depression, that whenever any unpleasant feeling, emotional feeling shows up, I just throw it into that bucket right away without really examining it, without really questioning it. So that began a process for me of untangling. And so perception is this naming that ties into a belief, and it's always associated with memory. Because where do we learn to name things? We learn to name something, and then we remember it next time we see it. That's how perception works. But particularly with emotional states, before we have this naming, there's a raw, energetic feeling that arises. And in Buddhism, this is called Vedana, and it's very simple. It's either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And so when I started to have unpleasant feelings, I started to interrupt the cognitive process of naming and started to just say, oh, this is unpleasant. Can I just feel the unpleasant without turning it into a story? Perception is always, there's a story with perception, right? It may be a very simple story, but oftentimes it's a very complicated and long story, right? And, I found that when I was able to just stay on that feeling level, that the emotions, so I'm separating feeling from emotions, because this feeling to me, I just think of it as energetic. When I was able to stay with that feeling level, even though I breathe with it and feel something unpleasant, it didn't blossom. And again, I suspect many of you have had at least periods of something you would think of as depression. When that takes hold, it kind of gets a grip on us and kind of stays with us. And when you stay on the feeling level, you don't get carried away in that tendency. So I started to see how important my belief system about what I was feeling was, and thus perception. Now, this has broader implications, as I said. When my wife says to me, would you take out the garbage? Do I hear, you are an inadequate husband and you failed me again? And, it's, or, and that's perception, right? And this is very common in relationships, in intimate relationships, that we develop a perception about a belief about how our partner, what they're saying to us. Instead of just like the words, there's a story, right? There's a perception that goes with it. I mean, that's one of my favorite examples, just in terms of the interaction. But so let me bring this now back to a traditional viewpoint, Buddhist view, which helps us to see how we break this down. First of all, how it happens, how we get carried away with perception, and then how we can undermine those unhelpful tendencies. So the Buddha says there are three classic misperceptions. We have the misperception that things are permanent, that things will bring satisfaction, and that they contain a self, that they are personal. So that you could say that they're permanent, they're perfect, and they're personal. And for those of you who have been around the Buddhist world a while, you recognize where this is going, that these are the opposite of the three traditional Buddhist three characteristics called impermanence, anicca, dukkha, unsatisfactoriness or suffering, and anatta, not self. So when I have this feeling, and one of the some years ago, I said to one of my Buddhist teachers, I remember this moment too, it's about 30 years ago, time flies, I'm always depressed. And he said to me, notice the times when you aren't. He didn't immediately say, no, you're not always depressed. But his point was, it is impermanent. And when you have the thought, I'm always depressed, it's depressing. And thus the feedback loop, right? But when you have a feeling, a depressive feeling, and you think, well, this is just a passing mood, this is impermanent, then you don't have to get so caught with it, right? You don't start that feedback loop. You go, oh, this is unpleasant. It's an unpleasant feeling, but it'll pass. Simple, right? But really hard to do, because we have this distortion. I don't know if it's a cognitive distortion, but it's sort of the term in cognitive behavioral therapy. We have this cognitive distortion that when something happens, it's going to stay. And then the unsatisfactory part, it's that there's this tendency also to think, what's wrong with me? Why am I having this pain? Rather than, oh, pain, emotional pain is a natural thing in life. But then the personal, right? The not self part, so key. I talked about self-pity. It's like just being here and seeing that other people had cough drops with them helped me today. I mean, it's very simple, because when you feel that you are having this unique experience that is just, some failing on your part or some curse, that you've received, and you realize, oh, I'm just another human being with a body and a mind, then again, there's this acceptance that comes with that. And I think acceptance is kind of a key idea here, to work with all the different energies that arise. I'm going to be 75 in March. And I remember in my late 60s, I had a couple of friends who were getting to be about this age. And I noticed that they were starting to lose certain cognitive abilities, that their memories were slipping. They were, and I thought, get ready. That's going to happen to you too. And it is. So that's really interesting. I was meditating this morning, and at the end of my meditation, I will recite the 5 daily reflections. I'm of the nature to age, to sicken, and to die. All that is mine, dear and delightful, will change and vanish. And then there's a list of related to karma. I'm born in my karma, heir to my karma, related to my karma, supported by my karma, owner of my karma. Whatever karma I do, whether good or evil, this I will inherit. But I often am like, oh, I don't really like doing them. But I'm trying to be, I guess I'm just trying to be realistic. But the fourth one, which has 2 different versions. One version is all that is mine, dear and delightful, will change and vanish. But the other one is, I must be separated from everyone and everything that I hold dear. And this morning I thought, what I hold dear is my body and my mind. I hold it, and when I say my body and my mind, I mean my healthy body and my healthy mind. And I just had this moment of like, oh, I have to learn to let go, because these are impermanent, um, that's just the reality. And here I am arriving at this place where I've seen others, and I'm sort of prepared in the sense that I knew this was coming. But what I thought was acceptance. I have to learn acceptance. And it's, some of you I know are in recovery, and this is a very common term. There's a famous phrase from the Alcoholics Anonymous big book: acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. I don't know if it's the answer to all of them, but a lot of them. And the resistance, the wanting things to be different from the way they are, that's where acceptance is so key. So I'm hoping that this fits with what I was talking about with perception. This but I'll just come back to perception. Maybe it'll all fit together, but if not, one thing after another is useful. I think that as people who are interested in, engaged in a Buddhist practice, questioning our perception, in other words, questioning how we are interpreting our experience, questioning how we are interpreting information, questioning our biases, our views, is so key to be living in a really honest way, an authentic way, not just staying stuck in like a narrow belief system, but really questioning, noticing bias that shows up, noticing racism that shows up, noticing all these unpleasant aspects of the human mind, and being willing to see them and question them and doubt them, and maybe deconstruct them at times. I think it's one of the most useful sort of tools in this practice, is to keep sort of asking myself, is this true? Is what I'm thinking true? Is how I'm reacting to this? Am I? It's not so much the reaction. Is what I'm believing about what I'm hearing accurate? Is there some bias going on here? And to stay, to keep that as a regular inquiry, I think is one of the more valuable things. And I say it's valuable to me because in some very simple way, I want to be right. Like, I want to see the world accurately. I don't want to live in delusion. And, it's a question. I don't know whether that's makes you more happy. I think that living in a certain amount of delusion, that can carry you along for a while. It can be a good survival technique in some way, but eventually it fails you, right? Eventually it fails you. Eventually the impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self nature of things will catch up with you. And so I want to live in that way, that I'm seeing the world with some accuracy. I have to assume that my conditioning is going to create blind spots that are, and there's always going to be opportunities when people are going to point things out, like, and that willingness then to say, oh, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I have something to learn. So I hope this was, useful, and I do, encourage you to make this idea of perception and beliefs and how you define things a regular part of your practice. So if there's time, I can take questions, but thank you for your attention.
Yes, there is time. So, anybody in the room wish to ask a question or online, please raise your Zoom hand so that we can see you.
And I think a key word that you said for me that really resonated was interrupt. And thank you for saying that. And that's something that I've been doing lately, that if I find that my mind is sort of going off into some thoughts, like I say, okay, story, or the feeling starts to spiral around. Just the notion of interrupting that, for me, it's almost like getting to the executive function of the brain, saying, okay, you're drifting into a story, come back to your breath or whatever. So I mean, I really like that you talk about it.
That's great. The word that we translate as mindfulness from the Pali language is sati, S-A-T-I, and it has its roots in the word memory, or to remember. And to me, interrupting depends upon remembering. I have to remember, like, oh wait, and so that, I think that's tied right in there. And that's one of the reasons I just think of daily meditation as helpful as just establishing something that you're more likely to remember, to be mindful. If you practice mindfulness first thing in the morning, you're more likely to remember later in the day to be mindful, and to try to make it into a habit. But interrupting, exactly right. I mean, because that's kind of all meditation is interrupting your thinking whenever you notice, whenever you can. Yeah.
And to follow on that, I read just last night in the Tibetan book of Living and Dying, which I read on and off over years, was in terms of meditation, was in terms of also interruption, that in just sitting meditation, you allow your thoughts to flow. And then there will be a time when there are no thoughts, and then thoughts begin again. One of the Tibetan teachers, Dilbo Khyentse, I think, said that it's those moments between the thoughts that is sort of like the pristine awareness, which is try to make that larger, make that interruption last longer. Because then that's perception in its natural state.
Yeah.
So also in terms of body work and energy, sometimes different states like depression, I've noticed, actually are also a positive state, in that it's a point for your body to sort of step back and sort of acknowledge and gather their forces to go back out. So it's not to punish ourselves.
Right.
Know that there's certain wisdom in the body that we may have forgotten.
Yeah, and I mean, if everything is impermanent, then you have to have all the different aspects of existence. We can't just have happiness without sadness. I mean, that's just how impermanence works. So
Just the flow.
yeah, and what you're describing from that space is Buddhadasa Bhikkhu calls it little nirvanas, those little spaces, and it makes me think about like the constructed nature of perception in this. That nirvana is, in a sense, is an unconstructed state. That's like the definition of it, that it's unconditioned, right? And so when we get a little taste of that, it's when there's just emptiness or non-perception, non-construction happening. And in a way, our meditation is an effort to keep deconstructing, right? As you're sitting, like every time there's a thought, you try to let go of it. You come back to that's the most simple experience. Letting go, letting go, letting go. I mean, that's the essence of practice, right? It's letting go of constructing. And eventually, God willing, there's no constructing yet.
Well, it's also sort of like a forgiveness,
Yeah.
in terms of shifting that our consciousness has an aspect of creativity.
Mhm.
It will just constantly recreate to meet what it sees outside or what it perceives outside. And that's an okay thing. It's
Yeah, of
just
course.
realizing that I am more than just my constructs.
Right. I mean, that's the key, right? That's the not self part. It's when we become so identified with the constructions, we don't realize that they are constructions. But when we can, if we're fully engaged in our lives, then we are constructing in a creative way. It's a natural part of the flow of life, but we're not seeing that as me, and that's where suffering comes. When we turn that story into our reality. So holding the two, holding the emptiness and the fullness of life is, that's wholesome. I think that's the spiritual maturity. Yeah.
I have a question, or not maybe even a question, but a reaction. And so Kevin, I liked your story about driving to Spirit Rock and deciding that maybe the label that you had for your feelings might be incorrect. And I am a person who I used to think of myself as a depressed person, and I had that label in my head, and yet, I feel like I too have sort of changed the label. Or a lot of people told me, you don't seem to be a depressed person, you seem to be a happy person. So now I tend to think of those feelings, which still certainly come up, as being sadness or anxiety. And it, I don't know, I think it makes me aware that I'm not very perceptive about my emotional states. Maybe that is something that meditation can help with, or therapy or something, but I feel like there's still a distance to go in that process.
Well, progress, not perfection, as we say in AA, but I just think it's that distinction between having a feeling and being the feeling, that, and maybe, maybe society and maybe, the whatever's our culture encourages this identification, like, this is my feeling, right? And it goes from being my feeling to being me. It becomes identity rather than just there's a feeling, there's another feeling. These are human feelings that show up. Some people have tendencies to have more of a certain type of feeling, but nobody is a feeling. It's such a funny thing that we even would define ourselves that way, right? I'm a fear. Like, what does that mean? Of course we're not that, but that's certainly how we often fall into those patterns, those beliefs. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your talk.
Mhm.
What I was thinking of when you were talking about this was, I call those my fallback positions, my stories and,
Yeah.
you know, and what I've learned is through recovery, that to have witnesses that know my fallback story, you know, where they come from and, you know, through whatever work I've done.
Right.
Is very helpful, and also that they're a story, and I used to say, this is bad,
Mhm.
this is good, oh no, and now it's just like, what else is possible, and I'm in trouble here. I'm in trouble here and I need somebody who knows and sees me, and the gift of my life and my practice is that I do have somebody that knows me and sees me, and we kind of number them sometimes, you know, I'm on the 13. And they're so familiar, and I think it's just for me, not saying this is good and bad or bad, writing or doing that, I need to.
Yeah.
And then there's other ways.
Yeah, thank you. And the forgiveness comes with that too, you know, that like, unpleasant. Yeah.
On the other term of forgiveness, brother David Steinel Ross is one of those that where he says forgiveness is really giving yourself back into your life. It's not just absolving yourself, but then the motion back into your life is important to re-engage.
That's. Oh, wait. Yeah.
Your, this talk we've been having about labeling, I thought I'd share a little passage of Shakespeare.
Oh, please.
Around that, as it happens, in the last act of Midsummer Night's Dream, Theseus is making a comparison, to madmen, lovers, and poets. And then he kind of talks about the act of labeling, and kind of inherent in it also is the formless nature of reality. So he says, the poet's eye in fine frenzy rolling doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven, and his imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown. The poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name.
So beautiful, thank you. Yeah, and behind you.
I'll say thank you for your talk as well, which unlike it's not true for all talks, it was very real and it was very sort of moment to moment and how I experienced myself and so applicable in that way. I'm wondering if you study with any particular teacher or in any particular school.
Excuse me. Well, I mean, I've certainly always, been most connected to insight meditation, and so my first teachers were Joseph Goldstein and Jack Kornfield. In the past couple decades, I've been mostly drawn to what's called the Thai forest tradition of Ajahn Chah, and so I listened to a lot of talks from Ajahn Amaro, who has a podcast. I mean, it's just they just put his talks into a podcast. And he ordained in that tradition in the late 70s, and he's the abbot of the Amaravati monastery in England. His teacher was Ajahn Sumedho, and Ajahn Sumedho was Ajahn Chah's first Western student back in the late 60s. So there's kind of a lineage there. Are you familiar with Ajahn Chah at all?
So I've heard the name.
Yeah, he was Jack Kornfield's first teacher. He's the person that Jack studied with and sort of tried to follow. And the Thai forest tradition, it's, there's a sign of simplicity to it. It's not academic at all. And it's really based in sila, the morality, the sort of, but in the broadest sense, not just rules, and right view. You know, so this talk sort of fits with that in a sense.
And is there a local study group of these?
Well, there's a monastery near Ukiah, a Bayagiri, that you can visit. And they have, maybe afterward I can give you the details on it, but they're actually in their winter retreat right now, so you can drop in, but usually you can go and stay there. But I'm also a renegade in that because I brought in, because I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict, and brought that in and made it, as you observe, very personal in terms of the way I teach. I'm not a sort of, I sort of am a bit of a one of one. If I think maybe I'm just, self-centered. But yeah, I early on in my teaching, I found that my voice was most authentic when I was speaking the way I do when I speak in an AA meeting. And that meant that I had to really be open and honest and talk about my own experience. And a lot of Buddhist teachers don't think you should be talking about your own experience because it's like there's no self. So why are you focusing on yourself? It's like, no, that's not the point. To me, the point is like, I'm actually just a generic human being. And here's a bunch of stuff that I've gone through that I've come to understand. And here's how I came to understand it. And maybe it'll reflect something for you. Maybe you'll see yourself in that. And that's my theory of teaching.
I was a non-renegade for a long time. I was a member of Shambhala for a long time.
Oh, yeah, well.
Moved away from Shambhala and now
Yes.
sort of trying to figure out, should I remain a renegade or should I, move back into the fold somewhere?
I used to teach quite a bit at Shambhala centers until they found out that I was disparaging of their founder. He, having been an alcoholic sex addict, I thought it was worth mentioning, but apparently they didn't want to hear that. So
They still don't.
well, no,
They still don't.
no. So, well, I don't want to get, any public disparagement going on. So maybe we could do a little meta do you do that
Sure.
ordinarily or?
It's fine to do. We have a limited time left.
Is there something we do together at the end of?
Yes, we do a dedication of merit, and you're welcome to lead that.
Okay.
Like to recite some of the words from the Sutta on Loving Kindness. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies, downwards to the depths, outward and unbounded, free from hatred and ill will. May all those in this circle be free from suffering. May all beings be free from suffering.